Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a brewer that is one of the top tier, most award-winning, and indeed you will often see from many noted publications that they are the true beer connoisseurs, craft brewer in the country. I've had quite a few from them, and I'm really liking what they're about. But it has been a while since we've jumped into them. And that is P Friem, based in Hood River, Oregon. Today we're jumping into a beer style that is not one you find often, and indeed the specific thing that they did with the beer, I'm positive I've never had one. They keep pretty simple as kind of the name of the game and their nomenclature. Indeed, the name of the beer tells you everything about the beer. This is Rye Whiskey Barrel-Aged Imperial Brown. It is exactly what it sounds like it is. This one clocks in at 12.3% ABV, and this one was aged for a full year. So yeah, I love a brown ale. In my opinion, we talk about this every time I have one of any stripe, that it's a very underappreciated beer style, and I think it needs to get a lot more attention and love than it gets. But I am 100% positive I have never had a Rye Whiskey Barrel-Aged Imperial Brown. Indeed, I've only ever had a few Imperial Browns ever. So, P Friem, as always, ever the very conservative with their label. It's just a nice clean design, white background, where the label says barrel-aged on the front, tells you a bit about it on the back. This is a 2021 release. So we're going to get this cracked and poured right in the old glass here. All right, that is looking beautiful, forming a nice head. I think I can get this whole thing in there right now. Yeah, I sure can. Awesome. That is a beautiful looking beer. No question about it. We'll get right up on it. Get that last drop. Good enough. Visually, yeah. Oh, big aromas already popping off of this. Visually, yeah. This is maybe a bit on the darker end of the spectrum for a brown. But again, this is an Imperial. So more malts in there. Higher concentration, it's going to darken the color. It's still brown. It's not pitch black. It's just a very dark brown, but it looks absolutely fantastic. This one did form a very nice, lush, creamy head here. Looks beautiful. We're going to get right up for a full sniff on this one. Oh, yeah. Okay, so on this one, yeah, you can smell the barrel, and it comes off, but there's also this subtle sweetness that comes off of it on the nose. You can smell a lot of caramel and kind of toffee notes, a little bit of caramelized sugar. So it's got a lot of aromas that I would expect to find, paired with this beer style. But the balance of it, I got to say, is really great on the nose. There's nothing that's really jumped, especially with an Imperial barrel age. You almost expect the barrel to drown out the subtleties of the underlying beer itself. Not the case in this one. You can really pick out everything right on the nose. It's got a nice pungency to it, but everything is really distinct. It's very clear on the nose, which gives you a really good idea of what you may be jumping into in the flavor profile. Yeah, that just smells awesome. Without further ado, we're going to jump right in. Head is settled down, but it's still holding true. A nice creamy head there. Let's jump in. Oh man, wow. Oh, this is a big beer, and it is delicious and complex and layered. Oh, this is filled with nuance. It's taking me on a flavor ride in directions I did not expect, and in all of the best ways absolutely possible. I never would have thought that what I'm getting out of this beer I would be getting, and I could not be happier about it. So, we will jump back in and we'll deal with texture and weight, but we need to talk about what's happening in this flavor profile. So the first thing when you swallow, the first thing I got was actually not the rye whiskey barrel. It was flavors that I associate with barley wine. And it was almost the entire laundry list of the typical flavors that you would get in a barley wine profile. We're talking fig, we're talking plum, we're talking raisin, we're talking apricot, other various stone fruit, and very much like is the classic case in a barley wine, it tasted like They were presented in the form of a baked good. Cobbler, pie, pudding, take your pick, doesn't matter. That rich, deep fruit that draws out that intensity and richness. That was present. That was the first thing that I got in the first few seconds. Then behind that is where the classic brown ale characteristic really started to pop in, with a ton of roasty malt underpinning, very deep roasty notes, slight suggestions of coffee, which is relatively common in a brown ale, but a lot of roast and a lot of caramel, a lot of toffee, and indeed even kicking some underlying roasty bitters, earthy roasty bitters coming straight from the malt bill. And you don't normally find these particularly deeply roasty flavors like that in a barley wine. Indeed, I think maybe the black barley wine I reviewed quite a while ago is possibly the only one I've ever had that had that layer. So this is kind of throwing you multiple different kind of beer style traits into the same beer. And it's absolutely incredible. The layers just keep coming and moving in and out. And then you're getting the underlying Imperial Brown structure that's still moving in and out with these flavors that I associate with barley wine. And then it starts popping in notes that are almost reminiscent of like a porter or a stout. Like the level of roast that it starts to take on just kind of pops out with even greater intensity. This is just unbelievably massive. And then yes, the barrel is present. It's got a very distinct whiskey barrel, but this is one of those, and one of the things I've noticed about P Friem, and I kind of understand what like most of the critics are saying, like this is the true connoisseur's craft brewer. Like they just blow everybody away. I'll leave that with an asterisk. That's for you to decide. But what I have noticed is with the barrel-aged beers, they are quite a different brewer compared to your average. And if balance is one of those things that I say really sets apart what is a truly great, spectacular, top-tier beer from the rest of the pack, from the run-of-the-mill craft, it comes down to balance. And on their barrel aging, I gotta say P Friem arguably balances better than any brewer I can think of off the top of my head. And it's such a tough thing to do and to get right, especially with the beer as big and layered and complex as this. To not have the barrel override everything else on the aroma, and arguably even more important, to not override everything in the flavor profile, that takes absolute artistry. I mean, that is just a level of perfection that you do not find all that often. And I love a big barrel-aged beer. I love a barrel-aged beer of any type that even leads and drives with the barrel, that maybe some of the other subtleties and nuances don't get to pop out as well. And I'll still love the beer. But the way that they balance what they do with their beers, I mean, you be the judge, but I kind of have to agree with the critics on here. They almost are second to none. I could name a handful of other brewers that I think brew to the same level of exactness, of absolute brewer's precision, but they just time and time again do it again and again. Doesn't matter what the style of beer that I'm jumping into, and unbelievable. I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but you would almost have to taste this to believe this. The layers of complexity, the way that they are able to draw out what they're doing with this beer, this is just, you know, God tier. It's God tier beer. It's not even top tier. It's almost in its own realm of what they've done with this. Now, I have never had a barrel-aged Imperial Brown, only ever had a few Imperial Browns. But for my first one to jump into, being from P Friem, I mean, I don't think you could possibly ask for more. This is just stratospherically good. Stratospherically good. Layered, nuanced, complex beyond belief. So, I absolutely have no choice. We got to jump back in for a second sip. We're going to let everything re-intensify. I'll pick out, make sure I didn't miss any subtleties or nuance in the flavor. We will talk about the body and the mouthfeel. The balance is absolute perfection. So we'll talk about the finish as well. But, oh man, this is so good it hurts. It is so good it hurts. Take two. .3%. This beer doesn't quite have the heft you would expect for a beer in this ABV range. It really, to me, just kind of feels like low end of medium heavy, high end of medium. So it's not quite as aggressively weighty as I expect. The mouthfeel is a little bit thicker than I would say the body is as a direct comparison. But again, it's not quite as viscous and resistant as I would expect. So given the ABV range, it's a little bit of a surprise there. But you know, together it's still really nice. And frankly, this beer is so extremely well done. I find myself not even caring about the fact that it's not quite as weight and texture wise present as I would expect for a beer in this ABV range. Like, it legitimately, it is so good and expertly crafted. I couldn't care less. But it is what it is. In terms of any other new subtleties or nuance, I gotta say, on second sip, re-intensification, just reconfirming how absolutely expertly crafted and delicious this beer is. But what I picked up on the second sip, re-intensification, was there's a good bit more of that roasty underpinning of the brown ale itself, as well as the subtle coffee notes popping out with a bit more clarity on second sip. Everything is still perfectly harmoniously balanced. It's still ridiculously nuanced, and everything is still moving in and out of each other. But there's a few little things that I really, really liked that are popping out with more clarity on second sip. And I expect that to happen as I continue to sip on this, and certainly when I get and go through my scores. So, the finish on this. A brown ale, that's one of those beer styles that is not typically associated with a very ridiculously long finish, but this one is quite intense, and it is barrel aged. And perhaps you would expect so, and if you did, you would be indeed correct. The finish on this is far longer than your average, and it does indeed come down to the pungency of the beer. It is a barrel-aged Imperial after all, and you have really nice barrel notes that still poke through long after each sip, well in excess of a minute. That is so far beyond the norm for a brown ale. It's really its own animal here. And the same is true of the underlying nuances and characteristics coming out of the malt and yeast blend. A lot of that roast, and I'm still getting a ton of those underlying barley wine-like nuances that are popping out long after each sip with relative intensity. They're still very discernible and very easily picked out individually. So that whole focus on the balance is here from start to finish. I gotta say, I absolutely love this. I expected this would be a good beer. It's P Friem. I did not expect to jump into this and have like one of those, wow, this is next level kind of beer experiences, but it is that good. I'm going to take my time, sip on this beer, count my scores. When we come back, we will get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was P Friem's Rye Whiskey Imperial Brown. That is the name of the beer. The beer itself was a Rye Whiskey Barrel-Aged Imperial Brown Ale. P Friem doesn't cut corners. They are quite precise with their naming conventions. 12.3% ABV on this one. It was aged in rye whiskey barrels for a full year, and P Friem is based in Hood River, Oregon. So this beer came close to, cleaning it in all categories, but there were two, despite the fact that in my heart of hearts, I would love to give this beer a perfect score, because legitimately, out of the thousands of different beers I've had over the years, this was easily in the top 10 best beers I've ever had. But I couldn't give it a perfect score because I have to rate how I experienced it based on my perception and what the beer is. So there were indeed two categories. I did not give this beer a perfect score. We will jump straight to those. The first was the body. The body on this, really for this ABV range, it was kind of lacking. It was really just high end of average. It was bridging the gap between a full robust medium and the lowest end of medium heavy. And for 12.3%, it just didn't have enough presence. It just wasn't weighty enough to get full points here. High end of average body gets a 6 out of 10. The second category is the very much related category of mouthfeel. The mouthfeel did a bit better than the body here, but again, it wasn't quite as full as you would expect. A 12.3% ABV beer should have a relatively noticeable bit of resistance and viscosity. This one had some, but really wasn't quite as much as I expected for this ABV range. It was certainly above average for a brown ale, and certainly above average for an imperial, but this one getting into the kind of really high ABV categories and territory for an imperial brown didn't quite do it for me at top tier status. But above average, mouthfeel does get a 7 out of 10. And that does leave a perfect 10 out of 10 for the remaining 8 categories of aroma, taste, finish, head and retention, appearance, balance, feeling, and intangible, my subjective thoughts category, and example of style. So the total score on P Friem's Rye Whiskey Imperial Brown is a 93 out of 100. I'm going to say it again. 93 out of 100 is obviously a tremendously high score, well above average. But in my heart of hearts, I would have loved to give this 100 because this is legitimately one of the best beers I've ever had. And I found myself thinking the same thing when I was reflecting on it and, talking about what I experienced. The fact that it wasn't quite as weighty or as resistant as you would expect for this ABV range, I just didn't care. The beer was that good. It was that expertly crafted that the weight and the texture didn't matter that much to me, that it wasn't quite meeting the expectation or the norm for the ABV range. So take it however you want to take it, but this was just a tremendous beer. P Friem always does a great job. This was fantastic. And of all of the brown ales that I always go on and on about, maybe this is the best of example of why I say I think it's a criminally underrepresented style out in the marketplace. Brewers, make more brown ales. Bars, put more taps dedicated to brown ales. This is a great style, and this is a fantastic example of exactly what I'm talking about. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just hit the bell icon, turn on your notifications. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.